Welcome to the Business of Hearing podcast, the podcast for high-performing hearing care clinics that want to learn the strategies, ideas, and truths behind some of the smartest private practice clinics in the world. Now, time for your hosts, Phil M. Jones and Ollie Luke.
All right, so I'm here with Dr. Emily McMahan from Alaska Hearing and Tinnitus Center. How are you doing?
Good morning. I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. And I suppose the best starting point is, give us the story, give us the context. Like, how did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, I had always wanted to go into private practice. I thought it was my 5 to 10 year plan. For those of you that know me, know I'm not that patient. I was about 15 months post-graduation and decided, nope, I'm done with this. It's time. I found a practice that I wished to purchase. We started the acquisition period. And 6 years come March, I have been owning. Since that time, we've taken that one practice and we've grown to 2 locations, and we are just having a blast.
Awesome. And I suppose why I'm really intrigued about this conversation, Emily, is like through our inner circle, I speak to many leaders who have small businesses, big businesses, everything in the middle. And I suppose to give you one big compliment from our discussions, and one thing that majorly impresses me is how much of a well-oiled machine that you guys have. Like, the way you present options and pricing to patients seems very well thought out. The systems you have to take care of patients feel very organized, and the way you then upgrade patients is very, I suppose, meticulous and methodical. It's very systemized, which is somewhat rare for this business. Everybody just seems to make it up as they go along. So it's very different. And I think an interesting way to go here will be the way you present options to patients and the way you've built your pricing structure and everything that way round. First time you presented it to me, it really confused me. Then the second time you presented it to me, I realized how smart it was. Because I've never seen anybody do this before. So without giving the full game away, I'd love a little bit of thought about where that came from and almost try to explain it in the best way possible.
Yeah, so one of the things, and I remember sending it to you and going, he's going to think I'm crazy, but maybe we should schedule time to talk this through. Because it's certainly not a handover and someone self-explanatorily go through the pages together. It's not very self-intuitive on that. So I had only ever practiced independently as an audiologist for about 15 months. So I didn't have a lot of exposure as a practicing audiologist, but thankfully through all of my different rotations, I had been in many different settings, from large hospitals to ENTs to private practices and to the VA. So I had kind of a fairly well-rounded experience in different areas. And one of the things that I had noticed in private practice, which is where I had always wanted to be, is the only model that I had personally been exposed to was the bundled model of audiology. However, when I had started attending AAA and going through my schools, the word unbundling kept coming up, but I'd never seen it in fruition. And so it was one of those things, you're like, okay, unbundling, I've heard of this. What does this mean or look like or do? And then through being a practice owner, we started taking Ken Cabot's boot camp because we knew nothing about billing. And so when we were looking at that, it was like, okay, we need to do something different. There's definitely been a shift in how audiology is working and looking and doing. And so when I first opened, in full disclosure, I was that traditional bundled model because I didn't know how else to structure it. And within about 3 months, we immediately started mixing that up, and I introduced an unbundled method. And so I still offer to this day both a bundled and an unbundled, but then I also offer a leasing package. And the reason I've done that is so in my bundled method is not a carte blanche for life type bundlings. It's per the initial warranty of the devices, and it's very laid out what is and what is not included within that bundled model. So it's not everything. It's a little bit kind of not the full traditional bundled package you see, but I quickly saw that patients aren't one size fits all, and to try to make one patient fit only one service model really just seemed to take away from what we're providing as healthcare providers. And And part of that switch that we noticed is opening up that flexibility of not talking devices, but talking service packages. Took just looking at that patient and finding something that worked best for them. And they felt far more in control of what choices that they were making. And it really gave them that flexibility to be in charge of their healthcare choices rather than feeling like, hey, this is where you said you wanted to be. Here's your only option. We don't typically as a people make good choices when we feel like we're forced or closeted into a decision. And so kind of opening up that plan and letting them say, hey, this is where you've identified you'd like to be. Which service plan do you think would best fit your needs? And the amazing difference that has changed in terms of how our consulting appointments go is incredible. My fourth years, when I take them, they sit there and they go, whoa, this is so much easier to present to patients because they don't feel like we're kind of influence or leading or choosing or making decisions for people. We're putting them all back in their hands. And as being a healthcare provider, my job is not to make a choice for someone. It's to give them the knowledge that they can make an informed decision on their own healthcare. And so that's, something that I really took from just looking at all of my different experiences and say, how in my practice can I present this information to my patients that when I'm in that patient chair, I feel like I'm making an informed decision that I'm comfortable with. And that's really where it started. And it's just developed, and I'm constantly editing and changing and looking at our needs. When I first started it, telehealth and audiology wasn't a thing. I have a whole division of telehealth now that we do. So it's a constantly growing and evolving plan. And I think that's one thing that is to my advantage is it's always changing. It's not stagnant. So if I were to pull up even 6 months ago or at the beginning of 2020, what that looks like, it's a constantly evolving package, so to say, because it has to adapt with whatever's happening around us rather than saying, this is my pricing, this is how I do it, this is where I will be. And I feel like so many of my colleagues get caught in that because it is a lot of work to go in and restructure. You have to go in and reformat your back end, so all of your codes and your bills and getting your super bills together. And it takes time. But I've just found that when I visit it every quarter and we keep tweaking and it's constantly moving, it's not overwhelming to adjust, but it's a living kind of organism, so to say. And it's always working for us, not against us.
Amazing. And how do you, I suppose, how do you actually do this? So if I'm a patient and I've come through, what does this look like? Because this can sound really confusing. You offer a bundled, an unbundled, a leasing. Like, how do you actually present these options in a way that is simple for a patient to understand?
Sure. So I do have a PowerPoint. We're a fully paperless office, so everything is integrated. We have a screen. It's, super tech savvy looking. So we pull up a screen and after we've counseled on what their hearing loss is, and this is happening post case history, post testing, and we've already counseled on this is where your hearing loss is at. And then I kind of pull up the screen and we talk about, socially, these are some examples that you may or may not have experienced. And we relate that through to their case history. So the patient might come in identifying, I'm really missing hearing my spouse. The television's pretty difficult. I've had a hard time lately interacting with our grandchildren, or I'm not feeling very confident at the grocery store right now with the barriers and different things that are happening. And so everything that we relate in that kind of blanketed example, we directly tie back to that individual that's right in front of us. And that usually leads to a good discussion. We also talk about other overall health history. So that's the time we kind of dive into their case history and say, hey, you've identified with us that you're a type 2 diabetic, and we want to make sure that, that's well managed. These are some implications of which, if it's not managed, could have a negative impact in your audiology side of things. We kind of work through this structure so that everyone's receiving a really personalized kind of treatment plan, so to say, but it's all tied back into them as a person rather than as a blanket slate for audiology. Part of that, we also have integrated the CogniView, which is a cognition screener, into our practice. So we do talk about cognition and the link in terms of keeping everything healthy and auditory deprivation and the strength in there. And we talk about, how all of that's relating together. When we finish kind of the what do all of these parts and pieces mean as a working whole from kind of head to toe body side of it, we then talk about, you've identified through some of our case history, through like our HIAA and through some of our forms that we have, this is where you are at, and let me share with you, how can we help improve these? And that's the first time in the entire conversation we'll actually bring up the words amplification, because it's not just amplification, right? That's a piece of it, but there's so many more things that we're doing in this mechanism that's not just about the tool. And so we then introduce it and we say, this is how we work on correcting these areas that you've shared with me are important to you. And these areas that we've identified are realistically a goal that we can work on helping you manage. From there, they've already like I said, everything's been filled out at this point. They've identified what kind of a listener they are, what their goals are, what they're looking for. At this point, I know, do they use a smartphone? Do they love it? Do they hate it? Are they Apple? Are they Android? What are their goals? Are they in the working population and this is their job field? Or are they at home? We've identified all of these quirks at this point. And so then at that point, we talk about, where do they feel themselves as far as, here's some different offerings that different hearing aid features have. And then they tell me, I think that's where I fit listening wise. From there, that's then the next step, is the first time they're ever going to see pricing. Because that pricing is not going to be, it's not really just based on the device. It's actually based on the services that are offered in support along with that. So say they were to choose that premium hearing technology. They're then given 3 different prices based on an unbundled model, a bundled model, or a leasing model. So they've already identified the physical tool that they want to use. And now we're going to identify which service plan do they think best meets their needs. I'm in a unique location that logistically, I don't see my patients all the time. I have some of them that fly 4 hours to get to me. I have some of them I see once a year on a good year. And I have some of them that live around the corner and they pop in just to say hello to us on a regular basis. And so for me, realistically, they might not fit that bundled or even that leasing model in the most appropriate way because it's not cost appropriate for them. I know in good conscience they will not use it to that ability. And therefore I tell them, these are all choices that are available to you, but you are not here full time. We can still do full-time care, but my telehealth is never included within the bundled service because that's a concierge package. So let's talk about an unbundled service package that meets both your physical and your needs as far as listening goes. And let's talk about how do we work telehealth into your care plan as well. And so everything has a place based upon what the patient is sharing with me. And so they're leading that entire discussion. I'm not, but I'm taking that information that they share with me and show them, hey, everything you've just shared with me fits really lovely into this category, or it fits here, or, that's not really a good decision. You realistically come in 1 time per year. You shouldn't be preemptively paying for services that you're never going to take advantage of, because that's a trust thing. They're trusting me to help guide them for that choice, and going that extra direction has never proven me to be not beneficial in the long run. And so when we're building that, it's a constant fluid discussion between the patient and I. And at the end of it, they have made every choice and we kind of build it from there. And so there's no, I really wanted this technology, but I had to sacrifice it because of the price. Or, I wanted this technology, but those options didn't work for me. Every technology piece has a different method that fits whatever service needs that specific person wants. And it's just worked out really wonderfully.
And does it work? Like, what difference has it made? Like, because it sounds great, but give us an insight into the difference it makes compared to the traditional way that you do.
Yeah, so it works for us. We're at about 90% premium practice in terms of technology. And then we're going to say about 15% of that remainder is the advanced level. And we do work with Medicaid patients. And so that's going to be about 5% of that population. But we're about a 90% premium private practice. The breakdown between unbundled, bundled, and leasing is really varied. Part of that for me, my better numbers would be if I look at anchorage versus looking at exterior, because that's really going to shift my numbers, which is not a very fair comparison for the majority of people who service people within their neighborhood, so to say. So I can't share that number. But in terms of close rate, when we're looking at that side of it, we're at about a 93% close rate currently using this method. And that is statistically higher than average. It's also higher than my individual close rate was prior to introducing these different methods available.
Amazing. And I suppose going back to the systemization of continually looking to improve things and not think that job's done, move on to something else. I think that's such a great example. And then similarly, like one thing I always find interesting is every time we approach you to say, hey, we're looking to an upgrade campaign. How many patients have you got that are 4 year plus? Like, you're like 12. And every other clinic of the same size as you is like, oh, we've got 200. And I was like, what do you do in order to upgrade patients internally and make that a natural thing to do, rather than just wait for the patient to be ready and have to lean on marketing campaigns and new technology hooks in order to do that? Give us a walkthrough of how you do that.
I feel like that starts with before I've even technically put them into a device. So as part of that walkthrough, I immediately start with kind of average life expectancy. On average is 4 to 5 years. That's before they've even identified which device they want to go into, regardless of technology, because technology has no deciding factor on how long it should work well. So kind of step one is planting that seed from that angle. We are a fully electronic office, and so we use counselors. So we have lots of different things set up. We do quarterly outreaches. Even if the patient can't come in, we still do touch points with those patients. And then every time they come into the office or we have a telehealth appointment, we go over kind of checklists. We have all of our technology to keep and say, is this hearing aid functioning at the proper level? What is or isn't happening? We encourage patients for that routine maintenance, and we have a really good follow through on our quarterly check-in cleans, which I think is one of our advantages, because whether they're seeing myself, whether they're seeing one of my audiology residents, we always almost have a student in our practice, or they're seeing my audiology assistant, they're getting that consistent messaging that, hey, everything's looking great. We're working well. These are some great looks. We start heading into that 4th year, not in the 3rd year, but we kind of hit that 4th year, and we have a general conversation of, hey, overall, right now, your listening needs are being met, you're having satisfactory results, all of our test box measures are looking good, everything looking great, but heads up, this is kind of some of those things that we start looking for, and can I share with you some of the information that's changed in the last 4 years? Often, because I have a great relationship with these patients, these are not strangers to me. I know my patients at this point. They say, oh, well, what do you have? Can I listen? Can we try? And so I'll send their hearing devices in. We'll have them sent in, get them repaired, make sure everything's working well. And they'll borrow a pair of newer technology. And usually by the time theirs come back, they're like, yeah, let's talk. Do we have insurance? What are we looking at? What are some changes? And we can make that plan. I don't like when I have no other option, but someone comes in and they're dead and they don't want to make the investment to send in an old device to fix it. I don't like them having to make that choice for new technology, feeling closeted. No one makes big financial investments feeling trapped very kindly. And so we never let it get to that point. Now, I absolutely have patients with hearing needs older than 4 to 5 years. I'm not going to say that I don't, but I don't have many. And I really just think it's because before I've even introduced to them what a hearing aid looks like or what is, we give them a general life expectancy, and we consistently follow through and share with them as that journey goes, what are some of those goals, upgrades, things that we can change, cool things that can be improved. And it's just an open dialogue. And it's not a dialogue that happens at the beginning and happens at the end. It's a full-on conversation throughout that journey with each other. And so when those changes come, it's not something that I'm just throwing out there because it's an older technology. We've naturally been having this discussion for years at this point.
I love it. And once again, it's setting expectation from the outset, which means there's no nasty surprises and no misinformation. It makes a huge amount of sense. I suppose final 3 questions that we ask everyone.
Sure.
The first one is, what advice would you give to your younger self just as you was about to open this practice?
That's hard. There's a lot of lessons we've all certainly learned here recently. So one of them, I would say, actually, I'm going to pull this up so I don't get the wording wrong, because I actually discovered this little quote yesterday, and I thought it was really applicable to the past year that we've all been experiencing here. So let me just read it so I don't mess it up. Right here. So it was a quote that I saw yesterday. It says, when you can't control what's happening, challenge yourself to control the way you're responding to what's happening. That's where your power is. And so I had just been flipping through on Facebook last night. We were, having downtime, doing nothing. And when I saw that, it really hit home, because I feel like the past 12 months, when we all look back, you're like, what a roller coaster this past year has been. It's had good moments, and it's, for most of us, had pretty scary low moments as well. But I thought that was really powerful. And when I look back over the past almost 6 years, because I can't believe that I've owned my practice for 6 years at this point, that's, I think, been that pivotal moment for me each time. Is there's been a situation that's been in front of me, and you have that silent, oh crap moment, what do I do? And then you make a decision. But everything that you've made from that decision point on is impacted, right? And I try not to run my practice reactively. I try to run it proactively. And so we do a lot of kind of role play in the sense of, okay, if this happens, what do we do? If this happens, what do we do? Now, did COVID throw us for a challenge? Heck yes, it did. I certainly did not plan for pandemics in the middle of all this, but 18 months prior to COVID, we had a 7.2 earthquake that shut one of our practices down for 6 months. And we had to do a lot of that kind of creative role play to say, how do we work through these things? And so I think, when I think about that quote, that would be what I would share with my former self, is just, you don't have to have all of the answers. That's okay. It's unrealistic to have them. So be honest with whomever it is that's asking the question. Take a step back, actually think about what that answer needs to be, or what that next step or direction needs to be. And then when you make it, do it with conviction, and then have an answer. Don't just do it, throw it out there and go, whoo, crisis averted, answered that, because it's not actually answering anything in the long term. And so I would say for me, just that it's okay to not know, but then figure out how do you address that. So when you run across it the following time, you're not in panic mode.
Love it. Second question. What is the most common mistakes that you see most of the hearing care industry make, or most private practices make, is probably a better phrasing?
I would say not moving forward. I see a lot of practices that will say in my opinion, the death sentence of it's how we've always done it. In this past year, I have watched practices that have been around for very long periods of times. They've suffered immensely through these large challenges we've all faced. And the consistent messaging coming from them is that this is how we've done it. That doesn't work anymore. It won't work, even if it wasn't a pandemic. That's not an answer. That's complacency. And if we've learned anything in the last year, complacency has no place at the table in this ever-developing world that we're living in right now. And so I think when we're looking at that, that's a huge area of concern. And it's certainly not to say that we don't all have our moments where you're like, oh, that's a lot of work to redo something. But the practices that I know very well and who I have watched over the past year and, shared ins and outs and backs and intimate details with, some fellow practices that I trust, and, we like kind of bounce ideas off of each other. The one consistent thing for all of us that not only lived through COVID, but grew as a practice through COVID, we all were constantly changing and growing and making changes and not saying, but this is how I've done it.
Amazing. And final question, which I hope should be the easiest. If somebody wants to learn more about you, where do they go?
Yeah, so my website is allearsalaska.com. It's kind of easy because we like all of them. Or you can find me, my email is dr.mcmahon@akhtc.com.
Awesome. Well, that's been amazing. Appreciate you being so transparent, honest, and and sharing so much. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, Ollie.
And there we have it. That is a wrap. Thank you so much for listening to the Business of Hearing podcast. Make sure you subscribe to be the first to know when a new episode goes live. If you're feeling kind enough to share your experience and leave us a 5-star review, it would mean the world to us. And if you want to learn more, then go to www.orange-grey.com for article, guides and trainings specifically written for high-performing hearing care businesses. We look forward to speaking to you again soon.